This week on Capitol Journal, the government shutdown is over, and Alabama's delegation played a key role. Alex Engel reports from Washington. That's a sigh of relief for food banks across the state, and Randy Scott reports on how they've fared. And Jeff Sanders reports on a legislative effort to tie higher education funding to student outcomes. Joining us in studio this week, U.S. Senator Katie Britt sits down to discuss her role in negotiating an end to the government shutdown and other topics. And Tuscaloosa Mayor Walt Maddox joins me to talk about his effort to reform the state's online sales tax. That's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The federal government is open again after a record-setting shutdown that lasted more than 40 days. President Donald Trump made it official, signing legislation funding the government through January. Alex Engel reports from Capitol Hill on how Alabama's lawmakers voted on the funding bill.
After 43 days, the House voted to reopen the government Wednesday.
The bill as amended is passed.
The Senate passed the funding legislation 2 days before that. A handful of Democrats in both chambers joined Republicans to put an end to the gridlock. Alabama's delegation voted with their party.
I'm excited it's finally over.
The shutdown left a trail of pain across Alabama, with delayed food aid payments and missed paychecks.
We've got a lot of military bases, a lot of general contractors, stuff that's important to our state, but it's more important to those families that have income.
But Democrats are frustrated that an extension of health insurance subsidies was not included in the measure. It was their main demand in the shutdown fight.
Extending the healthcare premium subsidies is something that's very important. Making sure that we have the resources that are necessary throughout the state of Alabama to bolster up our rural hospitals.
During a House Democrat press conference, Congressman Shamari Figures added that the deal's promised Senate vote on the subsidies is not enough. Congresswoman Terry Sewell also joined her colleagues to continue the health care push.
I want my constituents to know that nobody wins in a government shutdown, but it is a false choice that you have to choose between opening up government and protecting the health care of Americans.
Before the House returned to Washington, 8 Senate Democrats broke with their party to vote for the government funding bill. Senator Katie Britt helped make that happen. She worked to secure Virginia Senator Tim Kaine's vote.
Figuring out what he needed to be able to provide for his constituency within the framework of what the White House was willing to do. And so being a liaison between those two things, those two parties.
The deal required the White House to rehire federal employees laid off during the shutdown and guarantee back pay to furloughed workers. The bill runs through the end of January. It also fully funds programs like SNAP and those relating to veterans and military construction. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Alex Engel, Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Alex. And Senator Britt will join me later in the show to discuss all this in more detail. The end of the shutdown is a relief for families on food assistance who saw their SNAP benefits lapse. The shutdown put a greater demand on food banks throughout the state, but also raised awareness about Alabama's food bank network. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports.
We are trying to find ways to reach out to the community to help us get more frozen meals in here.
Staff with the Montgomery Meals on Wheels program are breathing a sigh of relief with the end of the national government shutdown. They're not alone. Other organizations, including airlines and government agencies, are looking to restart their operations. For Meals on Wheels, it's about keeping people from going hungry.
Currently we're serving 450 hot meals 5 days a week to seniors who are 60 and older. But right now, our biggest problem is the frozen meal program. We have a number of folks who provide us our frozen meals, and they're dropped off, basically.
We are definitely a volunteer-driven organization. A lot of people always ask, what do you need, more money or what, in order to take care of our waiting list? But it really is a twofold problem. You need money to start the route, and we won't start a route unless we can sustain a route.
Meals on Wheels CEO Chris Turman says the shutdown caused vital partners, such as the Heart of Alabama Food Bank, to see a shortage in some supplies. They're used by other partners to supply the meals program with meals for senior citizens.
All the money that's coming in, we're turning right around and ordering truckloads of food again. And we're trying to focus on shelf-stable, kind of core products that can last a long time.
Both Meals on Wheels and the Heart of Alabama Food Bank say the shutdown hit their facilities from a supply standpoint to a personnel standpoint.
We know in a huge program like SNAP, people are going to be affected in different ways. You've got different situations. You've got some people that may be working part-time, and so maybe they're getting enough that's kind of pushing through, but they still have some resources to fall back on.
Both organizations say it will take time to get the supplies and the people needed to get their daily operations up and running. They also hope the ending of the shutdown will encourage more volunteers to return.
Sometimes it takes very difficult situations to spur people into action. And so there's always good that comes out of any bad situation.
The meal is about feeding them, but it is also about providing a safety check that we know you're okay and that you're not on the floor needing help, But it's also socialization, being able to open the door, see a smiling face, and knowing that someone cares enough to deliver that food to you that day.
In Montgomery, Randy Scott, Capital Journal.
Thank you, Randy. The rising rate of obesity in Alabama has lawmakers and health experts searching for solutions. The Chronic Weight Management and Type 2 Diabetes Task Force met this week to look at new data on treatments and those rising health costs. Chairman Representative Ed Oliver said the state must be careful as more people turn to compounded versions of the GLP-1 drugs. And Dr. Catherine Sanders, a national obesity expert, walked members through the new research showing risks associated with these compounded products and how proper GLP-1 programs work in other states to improve outcomes and lower long-term costs.
We're not sure what all the answers are because the landscape is changing so quickly. We'll see what the Trump plan brings us. We'll see where insurance companies are. We'll see where the drug manufacturers are. And also in the state, at our level, something the legislature has to contend with is compounding pharmacies, whether they continue to operate, or do we find a way to make sure that everybody has access? If it's $150 a month, a lot of people may or may not take that, but I think that will eliminate the compounding pharmacies by and large.
Obesity is a really heterogeneous disease. Most patients need more than one medication, and most patients need to try a variety sometimes before we figure out what really works for them. And so it's not about it's not about prescribing a GLP-1 to every single patient who is eligible for a GLP-1. Some patients will do much better with some of the first generation medications. And you mentioned, phentermine, Contrave, Qsymia. There are medications that have been around for longer where they work really, really, really well for certain patients. And even some patients who are on GLP-1s, if they are not achieving their health goals with those GLP-1s and we need to add in something else, those older generation of medications are a critical part of our toolbox.
Alabama lawmakers are exploring a significant shift in how colleges and universities are funded. A legislative task force is studying whether to tie a portion of state dollars to student success outcomes. Supporters say it could reward institutions that help more students graduate and move into high-demand careers. Others caution that the details must be fair across very different campuses. Capital Journal's Jeff Sanders has more.
Finding a new model to fund higher education in Alabama is becoming a top task for lawmakers heading into the upcoming legislative session. Members of a legislative task force looking at modernizing Alabama's higher education funding formula are considering a performance-based model that would direct new state dollars to institutions that improve student success outcomes. Senator Arthur Orr co-chairs the committee.
We're not challenging our institutions of higher education to improve their outputs in any way. We hope this process, through this process, the legislature will help them with additional resources or additional funding to improve their outcomes.
Representative Danny Garrett, who also co-chairs the group, emphasized that the process is still in its early stages and the lawmakers want broad input before drafting legislation.
Probably not going to have a list of 20 outcomes that we're going to be looking, stepping into this slowly and measuring it, making sure that it's targeted and it's constructive and it's working. But we welcome your thoughts on some of these things ideas we floated this morning.
The task force also heard from Excel in Ed, a national education policy group that has advised states across the country on performance-based funding. Their funding policy expert, Matthew Joseph, shared lessons learned from states that have already put outcome-based systems in place.
This is something that the workforce department can be doing. It's helping figure out what are those in-demand wages, in-demand occupations, and are they going to change, and give people a little bit of a heads up and figure out. I feel like that's very specific to implementation and your design.
AUM Chancellor Carl A. Stockton attended the meeting and said institutions want to collaborate with lawmakers as long as the approach remains fair and considers the different missions of each campus.
I'm glad to hear the committee talking about the differences between the different universities. We're a regional campus and we serve a different set of population, a lot of first-generation students that stay in the community versus the metrics they're talking about using for your R1 institution. So I'm encouraged to hear that.
Lawmakers expect to have legislation ready for review before the session begins in January. Reporting from the State House in Montgomery, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, report cards are out this week. That's the state's K-12 school report cards, which measure individual school and overall statewide performance. Let's take a look. Overall, the state scored an 87 out of 100. That's up 2 points from last year and 3 points from 2022. For academic achievement, it's at 67, up about 3 points from last year and up almost 7 points from 2022. Academic growth scored at 97%, which is about the same as it has been the last 3 years. And chronic absenteeism is at 12%, down more than 2 points from last year and more than 5 points from 2022. And joining me next to talk about some of these numbers is APT senior education reporter Trish Crane. Trish, okay, I mean, based on these numbers, based on the trends, it looks like we're heading in the right direction.
That's easy to say, yes. All the numbers are going in the right direction. A little slip in academic growth, but it's not anything big to worry about.
Mm-hmm. All this was based on your reporting, and I'm seeing these numbers. And I don't quite understand. I mean, you see 87, 67, some different kind of numbers. How should we read these numbers?
Well, it depends on how deeply you want to read them, right? But it's important to know that academic achievement and growth are not percentages. They're scores, and they're based on weighted categories. I won't go into details. But then when you look at like chronic absenteeism, that is a percentage. So that number shows you the percentage of kids who are chronically absent.
And we want that number down.
Yes, we want that number low. And districts have made loads of progress on that since the pandemic. In fact, Alabama's making more progress on it than other states. It's another thing we've excelled at. And then, I think what you want to do is you want to get an idea of trends, right? Because one set of numbers doesn't tell you a whole lot. Also, the federal report card, 2 report cards, we have links in our stories. The federal report card gives a lot more information than the state version that's online. It'll tell you about teachers in your child's school. It can tell you how much experience they have, how many out of field teachers you have. It tells you about your child's classmates, and the percentage of kids who have disabilities or the percentage of kids who are economically disadvantaged. So there's a lot of information on that, but these top line numbers, we're looking at trends, and they are going in the right direction.
Now, local results are also online, right? So every school has a report card, and that's on the Department of Education's website?
It is, alabamaachieves.org. There are a couple of links you have to click. Go to the reports and data section, and then just hit all those tabs on the left. You'll find it.
You can find your children's school, or if you're moving to a new area, kind of checking out the schools. And I remember when this passed, because I was working in the Speaker's office at the time. It was a big priority, and the whole point was accountability, right? Let's let parents know exactly what their children's school, how it's grading. Is there any evidence that that's happening? I mean, these grades are out there. I mean, they're available for parents. Is there any evidence that that's happening in throughout the state?
It's hard to say. I think the communities that get A's and B's are very excited about it. When you get from a C to a B or a B to an A, I think you see it on social media and people celebrate. The schools that are struggling, that are at the bottom of the grading scale, you don't hear a lot from them on social media, but those are signals, hopefully, to like the State Department of Education. They offer additional support for schools that are struggling. And
there's the turnaround initiative, things like that.
Right. I mean, these are ways to identify where the struggles are, but realtors love these, and city councils, county governments. I talked with the superintendent whose city council was pretty upset with them at one point because they had gotten a C and they had been a B the year before. So people are paying attention to these, but it's generally principals and superintendents. And maybe some community members.
Yeah. Well, we would hope that. We would hope that if this information's available, and obviously people spend a lot of time preparing it, that parents and anybody, community leaders, that absolutely matters.
Right.
Go online, see about how your schools are performing with the intention of getting involved and improving what needs to be improved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you for your reporting on this. It's very valuable, and look to have you back on to explain other education topics that we have trouble understanding.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Before we go to break, 2 more turkeys have been spared from becoming Thanksgiving dinner here in Alabama. Governor Kay Ivey this week hosted the 77th annual turkey pardoning ceremony at the governor's mansion. This year's birds were named Phil and Buster after an online naming contest. Get it? Phil and Buster? As always, local school children joined the governor for the ceremony.
Thanksgiving reminds us to pursue and pause and be grateful for our faith, our families, and the blessings of freedoms that we share as Americans. And now, after careful consideration and taking a good look, I believe I have reached a final decision. Today, by the powers vested in me as governor of the state of Alabama, I am hereby granting a full pardon to Phil and Buster. They're free to live out their days soaking up the Alabama sunshine and staying clear of any Thanksgiving table.
Buster. We'll be right back with Senator Katie Britt. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Alabama's U.S. Senator Katie Britt. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, I appreciate being here, and I mean, it feels good to be home.
But to say, you've been in Washington quite a bit. The Senate has been in session. Man, it's probably going to set a record.
Todd, I think at this point, it's my understanding we have been in session more days than ever before and have taken more votes than any other Senate in United States Senate history. So I would think that we'll probably finish out the year strong as well. And obviously, we've gotten a lot done. We've had record number of nominations. We had a blockade, but we got that moved on. We've had, getting all of those in place. We had the One Big Beautiful Bill, getting that done. We've also passed the Genius Act, amongst a number of other things. And then obviously you saw us be able to open up the government this past week. So really proud of that.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about, because headline after headline talked about you playing a leading role, including Alex Engel. Our own Alex Engel reported on you playing a leading role.
Which, by the way, she does a great job. She has learned every way my routes, and so she will hunt me down and get an answer to a question
when you're going from the Capitol back to
she knows
to heart.
She knows how I get to a vote and
That's
how
great.
I get back, so she hunts me down for sure.
Yeah, she does a great job in Washington. You got to know those hallways.
You do.
So yeah, all these headlines about you playing a leading role in negotiating between those, I guess it was 8 Democrats, if you count Angus King, and the White House on reaching an agreement to end the government shutdown. So just start us from the beginning. Who said what? How did you negotiate this? And why was it you? Why was it you playing this leading role?
Yeah, so first off, in order for us to achieve this goal and get that government back up and running, a lot of people did a lot of things. I give the utmost credit and thanks to Leader Thune and to Susan Collins, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and the role they played in making this happen. Additionally, Jeanne Shaheen for the Democrats really stepping up and forging a pathway forward. A couple of weeks ago, Todd, I just said, look, nothing's moving and no one's talking, and we've got to change that. One of the ways that I felt like we could possibly open the government was through this 3-bill package that we ultimately utilized. I started socializing that, and the reason for that was that passed the Senate at the end of July with over 80 votes. So knew that those 3 bills had true bipartisan momentum, and felt like people had kind of forgotten why we were in this position to start with, because we hadn't passed the appropriations bills in a timely fashion in order to keep the government up and running. Now, I will say we did far more than Senator Schumer did. He didn't put any bills on the floor last year, and like I mentioned, we had 3 that we passed through the Senate floor before July. So I thought we could utilize that package, and in utilizing that package, what I knew that package did was unlock the funding to make sure that SNAP was funded for the remainder of the year, that WIC was funded for the remainder of the year, Capitol Police would be funded amongst our veterans programming, and a lot of good stuff would be taken off the table for future negotiations and or used as leverage in future potential government shutdown or funding fights. So, and knew how important that was. I had come back home. I went to my 25-year reunion at Enterprise High School, and I had several classmates that work, some in Huntsville and other places. Some were still on the job but not being paid, and some were furloughed, and said, look, how long is this going to last? They started talking to me about obviously the real implications of that for them. I then saw a gentleman from Huntsville, Alabama, who told me, he said, how much longer is this going to last? Is it going to last more than a week? And at the time I said, yeah, it is. And Todd, he said, if this lasts more than a week, I'm going to have to close the doors of my small business.
Wow.
And then I watched him go talk to his wife and tell her, and you could see the heaviness of the conversation. Then I was flying back to watch my daughter at a volleyball game after votes, and a gentleman on my flight said that his wife ran a food bank here in the River region, and that they had an increased number of clients coming to them. And so when you look at all of those things, when you hear about the Head Start in Dothan, you know that this shutdown has real implications for real people. And one of the things I think that I was most frustrated by, I withheld my paycheck the moment that this started. We had many members, particularly on the Democratic side, Todd, that never did that, but yet wanted this shutdown to continue. And it is my thought that as a former staffer and remembering what this was like, and you're trying to figure out how to pay your bills or your child care or whatnot, the people who are in charge of making these decisions need to feel the same pain that other people feel. So I withheld my paycheck at the very beginning, but all of this to say, literally sat in there and said, why don't we move this? I went and talked to Leader Thune and said, what about moving this 3-bill package? Why don't we go ahead and try to conference this, informal or formal? Then I went and pitched the same idea to Senator Schumer, not attaching it to a continuing resolution, but just actually doing our job and funding these things through the remainder of the year. So had promising conversations there, no actual affirmative, yeah, we can do this, but wanted to open the door because we had just put an appropriations bill on the floor right before that, defense appropriations. Democrats voted, even though it came out of committee in a bipartisan way, voted to not let us proceed on that. The reason that they gave me for that when I went and talked to them was, well, we're not talking. So I wanted to make sure that we opened that dialogue because you can't break a logjam without having a conversation. So starting with the two leaders and then building out momentum with the remainder of appropriations and some key people, Jeanne Shaheen being one of those, talking about how do we conference these bills formally and informally and get them ready to move them back over to the House. Knowing that attaching a CR with a new date was always a possibility, and the closer we got to that November 21st deadline, what was originally set in the clean CR, the more likely I knew it would be that we would need a new CR deadline. But in order to form and build out a coalition of willing people to have the courage to reopen and move forward, we had to have various conversations about what additional things would be in that CR, and that's where you saw the conversation with Tim Kaine come into play.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that because the reduction in force issue, obviously he represents Virginia. Northern Virginia is government central, so I'm sure you had a ton of furloughed employees. That's what was interesting to hear about and read about, was you negotiating that with the White House. And I would imagine, that was a White House policy, right? To kind of, lay off people that had been furloughed. Am I getting that right? So how did you get the White House to agree to something like that? Because I would have thought that would be unlikely that the White House would agree to do away with the reductions in force.
Yeah. So first off, like when I talked about moving this 3-bill package, even together or independently with the CR, I made sure to bring the White House in on the front end before I started, having these conversations, and said, look, I think this is a possible way forward, and wanted to make sure that I kept them in the loop. That communication continued throughout us building the momentum for this, both inside our own conference and and outside of that. When it came to figuring out, what the numbers look like and how we were going to piece it together, as you know, we ended up not being able to be totally unified on the Republican side, only having 52 out of 53 Republicans, willing to vote to move forward. So we knew the numbers-wise that we would be one short, and so Tim was the best and most likely opportunity that we had to reopen the government. And so had begun conversations, obviously, prior to talking with him, with the Democrats that we were negotiating with. And then about the last 48 hours, really started talking with Tim, nonstop back and forth, ultimately on the phone, but then ultimately meeting in person to talk through it. So, a couple of things that are in there were the, any just solidifying that any employee that was either working or furloughed would receive back pay for all of their time period. So getting that language right in place. And then to your point, those employees that had been RIF'd throughout the process, getting their job back, and then also a moratorium on RIFs, during this next time period. And so making sure that both parties were comfortable. Obviously, the White House is in the driver's seat when it comes to what they agreed to in the negotiations, but making sure that, where Tim was, where they were, trying to be kind of sort of a bridge within that, a conduit, if you will, within the conversations to promote clarity and continuation of those so that we could actually reach a result. And I think I got word from Jeanne Shaheen, about 5-something p.m. after I had met with Tim and others that we were a go, and we locked the agreement and moved it forward. So it's a great day for America and a great day for all of these families, coast to coast, whether it's the 42 million Americans on SNAP or people not receiving paychecks or those that need various services. It's a great day for our country.
Not every day you see Democrats coming to you on the floor and shaking your hand and giving you all that credit for it. So
well, and Tim and I had a good relationship from our child care. We worked on affordability and accessibility of child care, and we built out, Todd, a real meaningful bipartisan coalition to address that. Obviously, that was something that we ended up getting in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and really excited about the changes that will ultimately bring. But that relationship that Tim and I built, that of trust and respect, being able to have these kind of conversations and figuring out a pathway forward, I think is what laid the foundation for us to be able to have this one, and was certainly proud to, amongst a number of other people, proud to play a role in it.
So, the issue at hand, the issue that the Democrats had, was they were demanding extending, I guess, the subsidies in Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Y'all were not going to negotiate on that.
Right.
But they do have a point, because, with the expiration of these subsidies and just the rising cost of healthcare in general, it's about to be really painful for Americans out there, especially those on the individual market. So what's the end game there? What can anything be done to avoid this, healthcare cliff that people are about to come up on in terms of the incredible costs that people will face?
Yeah, so Todd, just so you and I are kind of sort of working off of the same, and also your viewers, so the more we dug into this, I think it's important to kind of sort of remember how we got here. So if you go back, Obamacare was passed in 2010 with all Democrat votes. Then in 2014, they began subsidies as the 400% there with the poverty level, and that was all Democrat votes. Then if you go to 2021, they did the COVID subsidies during COVID, and in that, though these subsidies are available to anyone, there is absolutely no income cap. Democrats only vote. Then they came back in 2022, extended that, and Democrats with Democrat-only votes actually set the date and deadline for this. So if you kind of sort of think about where we are and how we got here, that's where it is. When you look at these particular subsidies that they're talking about, there is no income cap on these. The Hyde Amendment has not been written into these. There's also no actual buy-in for people that are utilizing it. So we've seen a number of people, even in our own state, eligible versus actually enrolled. The numbers don't add up. So extending these as is, I think Republicans have said is not going to happen. And ultimately, Democrats are the ones that not only created it, but set the end date and expiration date of it. I do think, though, there is a larger conversation to be had here about healthcare and about the cost. Because when you look at the Obamacare, and it was supposed to help with affordability across the country, you look at actually rising cost for Americans, Alabamians front and center in that. And you also see that whether it's, the profits of insurance companies and others have actually moved in the opposite direction, having significant gains into the industry. So I think we have to ask a lot of questions about how we make this more affordable for people. But at the bottom line, I think Obamacare just on its face has been a disaster for Americans and for affordability. So figuring out a pathway forward, I think, is going to take real change, and it's going to take real conversation. I do have a number of colleagues that have ideas about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there somebody, y'all have had 47 days.
That's right.
Is there somebody sitting in a room coming up with another repeal, replace idea? That seems like it would be a very tough thing to do. But is there a conversation going on about some kind of health care?
Yeah, and I was in the Oval Office with President Trump, the day that we voted here in the Senate and moving those things along, and he reiterated his commitment to trying to figure out a better pathway forward for the American people, where we can actually lower cost and make this more affordable. So we have a number of people in the Republican conference, whether it's Rick Scott, who has a background here, or Roger Marshall, or others that have said, hey, we've got plans, we've got ideas. Marsha Blackburn has one. So I think you'll start to see us have those conversations. I think there'll be some bipartisan conversations. And then it'll be interesting because as a part of this package, the Democrats were guaranteed a vote on something in December. So it'll be interesting to see if they just put a flat extension on, which would not pass for the reasons that I just told you, or if they do find some people across the aisle to work with and try to actually forge a pathway forward. I think we're taking a look at the numbers. We see what's happening to Americans, but this is completely created by Democrats. We've gotten used to cleaning up their messes, and I think that this will be one that we're going to have to dig in and see if we can find a pathway forward.
We'll be watching that for sure. But on a similar note, you've got an economic situation out there that is just tough. It's families are being squeezed, and healthcare is part of that. But tariffs. We've talked about tariffs before. How it's really hurting farmers. It's hurting. impacting prices at the grocery store. I mean, it's just painful for a lot of folks out there. So I was listening to Tom Memmer, the House Whip, talk about this in some kind of political terms, but he was saying, look, wait until next year. Next spring, summer, fall, you're going to really see some momentum on that. So that's what I wanted to ask you about. With these tariffs, and of course there's a Supreme Court case, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Right.
But with your relationship with the White House, do you sense that there's an end coming for these tariff situations? By end, I mean trade deals with China and other countries that will, release some of this economic pressure.
Yeah, I think the president had some really good meetings and made significant progress there when he did do his overseas trip to Asia and talking about forging a pathway forward with China. We know that right there is critically important. How do we create a pathway with China that is sustainable for the long term? Ultimately, what the president's trying to do is make sure that we're actually onshoring jobs and onshoring opportunity, and then ultimately driving up American wages. We know that takes time, but I think you've already seen when you look at companies and even industry that has made commitments and investments and said, here's what we're going to do in America, here's the kind of investment we're going to make. Instead of creating a plan overseas, we're going to create it here. I think we'll see more of that, and then I think we'll see the ultimate impact of that as well. I think also you'll see the One Big Beautiful Bill actually be able to take effect. So whether it's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, whether it's $6,000 deduction for seniors, or for a couple $14,000, whether it's the child care tax credits that I'm so proud to have led the way on, I think we're going to make sure that more money returns to the pockets of hardworking Americans, and this is just the start. You've also seen the White House come out this week and say, we've got some big plans that we're going to unroll now that we've got the government up and running. So I would say stay tuned. For instance, you even look at the work we're doing in the Senate on housing affordability. We passed 24-0, which I didn't know anything could pass in this environment, with a bipartisan vote that strong out of committee, the Road to Housing Act to help with housing affordability. So we'll be looking to move pieces of legislation like that. One of the things that was so frustrating about this shutdown, in addition to obviously the harmful effects on Americans coast to coast and what I saw in Alabama, was also that we have 120 plus pieces of bipartisan legislation that have been marked up in committee that we want to see the Senate floor. And some of those I think are not only about affordability, which is so critically important, but they're also about safety, child safety online. I have several pieces of legislation that have been marked up. And so we're ready to get to work and begin doing those. And I think the American people will see positive effects as a result.
Let's say the Supreme Court does overturn these tariffs or talk about the Constitution, deem them unconstitutional. Right. Would there be votes in the Senate to go and because they're supposed to be through the Senate anyway, if they rule that it's that way, would there be any kind of appetite to actually institute these tariffs back?
I think people would take a careful look. I think President Trump has come up with some tremendous agreements with countries that people didn't think were possible. I think he's gotten companies to invest in ways that people didn't think was possible. And so I think solidifying that commitment to the American people in many cases would be a good thing. So I think people would absolutely take a look.
You mentioned protecting children online. You've got a couple of pieces of legislation on this. I was hoping you'd explain it a little bit. We had a discussion here in the State House about this. There were a couple of pieces of legislation dealing with filters on phones, age verification, and things like that. What would your legislation do on the federal level?
Yeah, well, and look, I just like to say I'm obviously not familiar with exactly what's happening here on the state level, but I certainly encourage state leaders, local leaders, parents to really be educated and informed on this. And if there is something that they can move through the State House that protects the next generation, they're absolutely worthy of it, of that protection and us fighting for them. That's certainly what we're trying to do on the federal level. So I have a couple pieces of legislation, just three that I'll mention to you. One is Stop the Scroll, and that's with Senator John Fetterman. John and I are dear friends and have really come at this as, concerned parents that see what's happening, and that just makes a warning label pop up on your phone that tells you about the challenging mental health effects and other things that can occur from being online. And that pop-up window, the only thing that John and I have said we want on there is just a number or a link to help, so that if someone finds themselves in an unthinkable situation, that we get them to someone that can help them. The other one is the Kids Off Social Media Act, and that is Brian Schatz and myself myself and Chris Murphy and Ted Cruz. So you could not span the political spectrum wider than that. But we have said often, we're not coming as Democrats or Republicans, but truly as for concerned parents raising teenagers in this environment. And that one says you can't be on social media until you're 16, which is what the Surgeon General says they do, or 13, which is what the social media companies say they do anyway. And the Surgeon General actually says 16 is when you should be on, so 13 shouldn't be a problem. It doesn't allow you to use algorithms against our kids under the age of 18. We found that algorithms drive them in many times to dark holes. The longer you stay on a post, the more money they make, the more depressing or addicting the content, the longer you stay. So it's a vicious cycle there. And then last but not least, it's eyes on the board, really trying to create a space where social media is not utilized in the school. And then the last one is the newest piece that I have signed on to with Josh Hawley and Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal. Again, a piece of bipartisan legislation. It's about AI chatbots, saying AI chatbots can't be used against children under 18. It also makes sure that the AI chatbot periodically has to remind you that it is a chatbot. Also tell you that it's not a licensed, whether it's therapist or a physician or any of that. So there's a couple of things that safeguard for kids, because we have seen far too often, and I've heard too many stories from parents of these chatbots that have induced the children into either sexual interplay. We saw that on Meta with an 8-year-old. We saw then them also when the parents have gotten the chatbot dialogue back and forth after the fact, where they have isolated them from their parents, where they have told them and encouraged them to take their own life.
Goodness
and
gracious.
In many of these cases, unfortunately, that's what has happened with these children. And I think it's really important that we take a step back. 1 in 3 high school young women last year said she actually considered death by suicide. Then 25% of high school young women said that she actually made a plan to take her own life. And then 13% of high school young women actually attempted death by suicide. When you add in young men, that number is 9%. So 9% of our high school population across this country attempted death by suicide last year. And so being honest about what's happening, being honest about people victimizing, and going after our children in the way they do, and this added layer that I think many parents are unaware of until it's too late. I think we need to sound the alarm bells, we need to educate people, and then we need to actually do something about it, because the most vulnerable deserve to be fought for, and this is certainly the case with us.
Well, I'll be watching that as well. You mentioned Senator Fetterman, John Fetterman, senator from Pennsylvania. He had a fall this week, and you've seen a lot of outpouring of support on social media.
I've gotten a lot of texts from my colleagues asking for his number, wanting to reach out and make sure he's okay, and that type of humanity, particularly in the building I work in, is encouraging to see, and we certainly hope that he gets well soon and is back at it, because we need him.
Well, yeah, and it's just so interesting, because you just find yourself just being very candid, just rooting for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's had so many struggles.
Yeah.
But he's, what you see is what you get, and that's kind of rare in politics. So it's interesting.
And it is always like that too. And that's one of the things I love about John. John and I became friends at orientation. So right when we got there, and I remember just the experience for me, just kind of sort of thinking, do I belong here? And this is, it's a lot. And then if you think about the challenges that he had coming into that, with just the limitations from his stroke and kind of sort of getting back moving, I could only imagine what all he was going through at that point in time. And Wesley became dear friends with Giselle, and so the four of us, enjoy each other's company and meals and just encouragement. But he really, particularly in the midst of this shutdown, went against the grain, because he said, this is what's right for the American people. This is not about party. This is about people. And he continued to elevate his voice, even when, he's having to hear a lot of noise, kind of from both sides. But he really has stepped forward and is speaking truth in a time where we certainly need it.
Well, and we're going to continue to root for him.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, all this you're doing, all this time in Washington, running around doing a lot, I can't imagine your flight schedule. You found time somehow to host a neighborhood get-up.
How'd you know about that?
Because I have a picture here.
That's so good.
This is Phoenix Johnson. She's a dear friend of mine. Sent a picture, and I'm going to tell you, you have a big fan in Phoenix Johnson. They live over on Bankhead. And I just thought it was so cute because, I don't know, y'all kind of favor.
Love
she is
it.
a Senator Katie Britt fan, so I had to take a moment of personal privilege, if you will.
Well,
to
Phoenix,
shout that out.
and that is who we're fighting for. It's Phoenix. It is the next generation, and it's how do we make things better for them, and how do we, as your parents and grandparents always told you, leave things better than you found them. And I think it's our generation's turn to make good on that. And Phoenix, that she inspires me. That's what keeps me moving. And it was awesome to have our neighborhood get together, get to visit, and see people. I think this day and age, you feel like you're connected because you're on your phone, and actually that couldn't be further for the truth. I think getting in front of people, and you pass them when you're walking your dog, but stopping and having conversation has become more and more rare. So wanted to get people together, enjoy each other's company in the neighborhood, and Phoenix was star of the night.
Well, I had to share that with you. Look, we're out of time, but thank you so much for your time, and I hope you'll keep us updated.
Absolutely, will do.
We'll be right back.
Since 1997, Alabama Public Television has provided programs, services, and resources to child care professionals, teachers, and parents. Visit aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Tuscaloosa Mayor Walt Maddox. Mayor, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Lots to talk about, but I have to say y'all had another monster weekend in Tuscaloosa this weekend. I mean, it just, the scale of it, the scope of it just looks incredible. What goes into planning just logistically for a huge weekend, of influx of fans like that from a mayor's standpoint?
Well, months of planning, and it all begins with our public safety personnel, but also it's beyond fire and police. It's public works, it's water and sewer, it's revenue, it's inspections. Overall, we'll have 600 plus employees who will be working on game day itself, hundreds of employees before and afterwards as well. We go from a city of 115,000 to 250,000 people in about 24 hours. So we go from Alabama's 5th largest city to the largest city, and it takes a lot. As mayor, number one, we want to make certain everybody gets in and out safely, and that's a huge logistical challenge. We couldn't do it without our amazing team at the city and our partnership with the University of Alabama and other state agencies that assist us.
But as challenging as that is, it's got to be a major economic boon for your city every time there's a home game.
Absolutely there is, and we know that we benefit by it. It creates jobs. It creates also for us a national profile. It is so cool being the mayor of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, but I can go anywhere in the country and they'll go, oh yeah, University of Alabama football. We embrace the heck out of that because it helps us sell our city. So it's really a good thing. I always think we're the Green Bay Packers of college football, right? When you say Tuscaloosa, you think of championships in a very positive way. We try to leverage that for economic development and opportunities outside our own state.
Okay, I'm not going to get sad over here as an Auburn guy, but very well said.
Your time's coming back, and we all know that when we play down in Auburn, which is coming up very soon, mystical things happen.
That's true.
So you have a lot to be hopeful
said it's
for.
haunted down there. Yeah,
it is haunted.
Okay, SSUT,
yes.
Simplified Seller's Use Tax, more colloquially known as the Internet Sales Tax. Mm-hmm. Been around, I guess, for about 10 years now, but it's controversial. You have brought a lawsuit to the state. You were in town this week to, I guess, the first hearing
yes.
about that was going on. Make your case. What is your case legally for doing away with the SSUT?
Well, we want sales taxes in Alabama to be collected like they've always been collected, and that's by destination sourcing. So here's the deal. If I'm in Thomasville, Alabama, and I go shop at the Walmart, I pay Thomasville sales taxes. But if I go to that same Thomasville Walmart, but purchase it on the Walmart app, still pick it up at the same Walmart with the same employees, now I'm paying SSUT, which means the city of Thomasville basically doesn't get any of those dollars. Physical nexus should matter. And so what we're arguing as cities in Alabama, that if you buy something in Auburn, Alabama, or in Atmore, Alabama, or in Rainbow City, Alabama, those dollars should stay in the city in which they're purchased. The way that SSUT has been created, it's ignoring physical nexus. And so that is simply our case. If you buy it local, those dollars should stay local.
And could you map that with today's technology, with like cell phones and everything, to know exactly where somebody was when they purchased a product?
Absolutely. In fact, Apple does it today. So when I buy an Apple product or an Apple app, it's actually destination sourcing. So with Apple, we want to happen across the state. The technology exists today that it didn't exist 8 or 9 years ago. And so now it's time that that technology catches up and that cities be able to, and towns, and frankly counties as well, if it's generated local, it needs to stay local. When communities set local taxes, they do it for a reason. They do it because they want it to go into their schools. They want it to go into their police departments. They want it to go into their fire departments. Those are why local taxes are created. When you look at this map here and you see across Alabama, you actually see a couple of things. You see communities whose local sales taxes are actually lower than SSUT. So where you see green and blue, those are areas of Alabama that are overtaxed. So SSUT actually has a detrimental impact on rural Alabama. And in those areas that are gray, you see communities who have set their local sales tax rates at rates that are higher than 8% because they want to invest in their schools and their law enforcement and into their fire departments. And so we think it's very important that local sales tax rates, number one, stay in the communities they're generated, but two, that the community has the opportunity to elect those decision makers and decide whether they're doing a good job spending those sales tax dollars. SSUT overtaxes rural Alabamians, and second, it abandons the ability of local people to determine how local taxes are spent.
I do hear from the other side, counties specifically, Sonny Brassfield, who runs the Counties Association, about, look, if this goes away, there's going to be chaos. And a big revenue generator that didn't exist 10 years ago would go away, harming counties, harming the state revenue. How do you respond to those arguments?
Well, number one, it's harming, we know, over 60 cities in Alabama. Nearly every school system in Alabama is being harmed by SSUT. So I would argue that every public education student and the majority of the population of the state is being harmed by the model today. Number two is that destination sourcing is already being done across the United States. Our friends in Tennessee are doing it successfully today. Apple is actually doing it successful today in Alabama. So really what Sonny Brassfield, who I respect, and his position with the county commission, all they have is to sell fear. Destination sourcing is happening across the United States. It's happening actually here in Alabama with Apple. It is something not to be feared. It's something to be embraced. And think about it this way. Taxes that are generated locally should stay locally. When you pay taxes in your community, you believe it's going to your police department. You believe it's going to your fire department. It's going to your schools. That's not happening right now with SSUT. And that's not fair to citizens who work hard to pay taxes. It's also not fair to those people in rural Alabama who are being overtaxed by SSUT. And that should be part of this equation too. That's not fair to them as well. Going to destination sourcing, correcting this problem is fair for every Alabamian.
So play the tape through to the end. If you are successful in this lawsuit, would that mean legislation? Would that mean the legislature needs to come in and change this somehow? Or even if you aren't successful in the lawsuit, is that what you're kind of overall seeking, is the legislature to change this for more equity for cities?
I think ultimately, we have sought for 9 years to get the legislature to make changes to this. So we just didn't begin at a lawsuit. This has been a 9-year process. We believe there are fundamental flaws with the way this law was designed and implemented, and those will be adjudicated in the courts. But certainly we would love the legislature to be able to remedy those problems and create a fair balance. I think in the end, all of us as mayors understand that any solution may be one we have to work through. And for 9 years, we have been willing to compromise on that. At the same time, as we continue to lose at the city of Tuscaloosa over $15 million a year, Huntsville's losing nearly $50 million a year, Mobile over $30 million a year. Alabama's leading job producers are cities who create the economic investments. We can't continue to take those amounts of sales tax losses and not do anything. And that's why moving forward with litigation we felt was important. So we'll have to continue to follow the train tracks of lawsuit. At the same time, we're certainly going to work with the Alabama legislature because I don't think they intended this to happen the way it's unveiled itself over the last decade.
Oh, I think you're right about that. And yet, anytime you start, opening up this can of worms, that's why probably it hasn't been done yet. With this lawsuit, is it too early to tell how it's going? This was kind of a preliminary hearing this week, right?
Yes, we're right now in the processes of motions of dismissal, which will likely continue for the next few months, like any sort of court case, especially as one that's complicated like SSUT. I imagine it could be months, if not years, in the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, while I've got you, I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned the Big Ten mayors, and I had your colleague Sandy Stimpson on this past week. Well, what a pleasure it was to have him as the outgoing. But y'all have been really active as a group, and I found it interesting. But I wanted to ask you specifically about the issue of mental health. That's something the state has really focused on of late more and more. But it's not just a state issue or a national issue, because y'all see it from a local level. Talk about y'all's focus on mental health from a mayor's perspective.
Well, the number one job of any mayor in Alabama is public safety, and under that public safety umbrella is mental health. In Tuscaloosa, for example, we have the largest state mental health hospital in Bryce, but unfortunately the second largest institution is our Metro Jail, where 30% of our inmates are on some sort of psychotropic drugs. We are now interacting in a way, because there's no really place to institutionalize those who are in high mental health distress. Probate judges will tell you throughout Alabama there's no room to place them. And what you're seeing is more and more of those with mental health needs ending up on our streets. Then they ultimately end up in our jails. So as mayors, what we want to do is work with the Alabama legislature to figure out what sort of solutions can we create to better address this problem. I believe the state has taken some significant steps in recent years, but there's partnerships we believe we could form with the state to better remedy this problem. It's growing, not decreasing, and we as mayors feel like we need to give voice to this, not just to say here's a problem, but we want to work with the Alabama Department of Mental Health and the Alabama legislature in trying to craft some solutions.
Yeah, there's been a lot of movement on that. And you know, one of your biggest advocates is Rex Reynolds, the General Fund Budget Chairman, who is a former police chief. He's seen it on the ground level too, so it is interesting to see that movement.
We have today, and I don't mean to interrupt you, we have 26 police officers who do nothing but mental health care. We have 4 social workers at the city who do nothing but mental health care. Representative Reynolds, as a police chief, probably saw the evolution of police departments having to morph into mental health providers during his service with the city of Huntsville. That's happening more and more. And so as mayors, we want to bring that perspective and work with the legislature to try to craft solutions.
Absolutely. Well, let us know when the Big Ten mayors are in town. We certainly want to cover that. Mayor, we're out of time, but thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
All right. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.